My perspective on it is just a continuation of that fight. To me, it didn't seem like it was like the same Volk.
It's always weird. I never wanted to fight a guy. I like his family. I like him. It's his job, you know. It's something that we have to do. There's a fucking big difference on that. And anywhere I fucking see him, I'll fuck him up. This fucking guy, you know, I just don't really like him. I don't like him. You know, I want to fuck him up. That's what I want to do.
It's an interesting matchup for the division, especially when the long-range Volkanovski lost his belt to Topuria just last week. Thanks to Volkan Holloway pretty much running through the division, featherweight has somewhat been stagnated. I'm not so sure how active Topuria will be, but at least for the contenders, it's not a bad news at all. It's an important comeback for Ortega. Ortega made his UFC debut in July 2014 and was only active until 2018 when he lost against Max for the belt. So pretty much for the past 5 years, he had only 3 fights against TKZ, Volkanovski and Yair, which he lost in the very first round due to an injury. Ortega's injury was quite serious. His shoulder was badly dislocated during the scramble, possibly followed by a ligament tear. Once dislocated, the shoulder tends to pop. But considering the long layoff, his shoulder status should be fine, and I would imagine he would have made a smart decision to come back in a good shape. Conventionally speaking, a grappler and striker's matchup favors the grappler. But the thing is, T-City is a top-notch grappler with not much of wrestling. His entry is quite sloppy and the explosion is not so good. If you have to lay out all the martial arts, BJJ would most probably have the closest relation to MMA with the Gracie family as forerunners. In other words, more BJJ practitioners will likely train and compete in mixed martial arts. So many BJJ branches such as 10th Planet will not underlook the entry and tackles to bring the opponent down to the ground. Well, it's easy to say, because Ortega doesn't really demonstrate shooting clean double legs or singles. So in the end, stylistically speaking, the fight favors Yair. Yair is much faster, striking more crisp, longer in range and very offensive on his back too. Ortega, with no doubt, is a submission artist, and his catch and guillotine and triangle on his back is so dangerous. But if you look at the opponents he submitted, or tried to submit at least, they were mostly shorter than him. Frankie Edgar, for an instance, nearly got submitted by guillotine. And Cub Swanson, a beautiful and creative demonstration of wrapping the neck by pushing himself against the cage. In the case of Moicano was shooting the double leg, which kinda gave his neck himself. And Diego Brandao couldn't capitalize on Ortega's poor double leg attempt and the following top position. Question to Ortega's absence of tackle has always been a thing for the fans. But wrestling, unlike striking, especially when it comes to explosion and clean double leg shoot, is very difficult to keep it in your system once your style is fixed. I don't think Ortega will ever be able to acquire fast and conventional entry, but what he can capitalize on is digging into the underarms of his opponents and pushing towards the cage. So basically a grappler who smolders than who tackles. Somewhat benchmarking Aljo in the cage side because his technique to wrap his arm around the neck is so slick and smooth. However, Yair is taller, so it won't be so easy for Ortega to catch Yair's neck in the clinch unless they are scrambling. Ideal sequence would be, like in their first fight, to push Yair towards the cage and drag or to flip him down to the ground. I believe once Yair on his back, Ortega will have plenty of room to position himself around. Ortega's fight IQ is quite high, at least when it comes to the submission catch. If you look at Cub Swanson fight, Ortega clears Swanson's grip with his right leg to secure an inverted Dars. Yair has been showing a great improvement mostly to stay offensive on his back and to recover off the ground, but still, the level of grappling would not be a match. When it comes to striking, Ortega looked very crisp against TKZ, but against Max and Volk, he was just surviving mostly. So by pure math, Yair, who still posed a great danger for both of them, would hold a definite upper hand against Ortega. Ortega switches his stance quite often with the conventional long guard, which gives room for uppercuts, or in the case of Yair, a front kick would be a rewarding option. Ortega is also very heavy on his lead leg, which will give much room for Yair to chop an outside leg of Ortega with kicks. The fight will most probably be a conventional tag and catch match. Ortega has to press and cut Yair off the cage. Ortega often uses high kicks to cut his opponents, but again, he has to chase Yair and run him down, clearing the distance first. Ortega's combinations are quite sloppy, but his lead hand and checks tend to land quite clean. And when he pushes his opponents, he tends to follow with double jabs, and following straight combination is quite clean as well. So ideally speaking, if Yair wants to stay in the range with kicks, Ortega should make more effort to constantly put Yair stepping backwards and at some point lock him against the cage. Ortega had a couple of successful kick catches against Volk and Korean Zombie, but I think Yair's kick is going to be too fast and accurate, so it will be quite difficult for Ortega to catch. But if Ortega is successful in striking against Yair, getting Yair down on the ground would be much easier. Against Zombie, Ortega was constantly feinting with his lead hand touching Zombie's lead leg, and then found nice angles to land overhand. So in the end, it should be Ortega who needs to fight like an MMA fighter than a grappler. I would imagine conditioning and cardio would favor Ortega, so it's better in Ortega's perspective to keep the fight as sturdy as possible. If he can keep Yair pushed towards the cage, fight might turn very easy for him as well. But again, the fight will only last 3 rounds and my prediction will be a unanimous decision win on Yair. I've been a huge fan of T-City and would like to see much improvement in his techniques. So hopefully, win or lose, fans can see upgraded version of Brian T-City Ortega.